Dorothy Williams had been called many things in her 73 years, but never a thief, until today. The glass door swung shut with a cruel finality that echoed through Westfield Plaza like a gavel strike. On the polished marble steps outside Luminu Boutique, Dorothy Williams steadied herself against the brass railing, her weathered brown hand trembling not from age, but from something far more corrosive. Humiliation that burned hotter than the afternoon sun beating down on her silver hair. Inside the store, through the spotless windows, she could see them. The manager, arms crossed in triumph. The young clerk who'd first approached her, looking away now, ashamed but silent. The other customers, those who'd watched the whole scene unfold, already turning back to their shopping, as if an elderly black woman being forcibly removed from a high-end clothing store was just another Tuesday inconvenience, like a sale ending or a payment system going down. Dorothy's canvas tote bag, the one with Brooklyn Public Library printed in fading letters, hung heavy on her shoulder. Inside it, the crumpled dress she'd hoped to return pressed against her hip like an accusation. $300. Her Social Security check. Money she couldn't afford to lose. "Ma'am, I told you. No receipt, no return." And frankly, the manager's voice still rang in her ears, that particular tone that made frankly sound like a weapon. "We have concerns about the authenticity of your purchase." Translation: "We think you stole it." The words had hung in the air between them like poison, never quite spoken but crystal clear to everyone within earshot. The manager's eyes had traveled deliberately from Dorothy's worn sneakers to her faded denim jacket, from her economical bun to her unmanicured hands, making a calculation that had nothing to do with receipts and everything to do with assumptions that had been made about people like her for centuries. Now, standing in the brutal clarity of daylight, Dorothy felt the familiar weight of invisibility and hypervisibility warring within her chest. She was 73 years old. She had survived Jim Crow, Georgia, raised 3 children alone after her husband died in a factory accident, worked as a nurse for 42 years in understaffed urban hospitals where she'd held the hands of the dying and welcomed new life into the world. She had earned every one of her wrinkles, every gray hair, every ache in her bones. And she had just been thrown out of store like trash. A younger woman might have screamed. An angrier woman might have threatened lawsuits and viral videos. But Dorothy Williams had learned long ago that sometimes dignity meant walking away with your head high, even when your heart was breaking, even when injustice wrapped its fingers around your throat and squeezed until you could barely breathe. She was turning to leave, to retreat to the bus stop where she'd wait 40 minutes for the crosstown route, when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it, but it buzzed again. And again. Behind her, through the boutique's windows, the manager was already directing the young clerk to rearrange a display, the incident forgotten. Business as usual. Justice denied with such casual cruelty, it almost looked like customer service. Dorothy didn't know it yet, but in exactly 4 minutes, that same manager would be on her knees. 20 minutes earlier, Dorothy had entered Luminu Boutique with nothing but hope and a problem to solve. The dress had been a gift from her daughter, Simone. Well-intentioned, but wrong. The blue chiffon looked beautiful on the hanger, but at home, in her small apartment's harsh bathroom lighting, Dorothy had seen the truth. It was too young for her, too formal for anywhere she'd actually wear it, and the color made her look washed out. Simone meant well. She always did, but she bought things for the mother she wanted Dorothy to be, not the woman she actually was. "Just return it, Mama," Simone had said on the phone that morning. "They've got a 30-day policy. I saw it on their website." But Simone had forgotten to leave the receipt. She'd removed the tags in her excitement. "Try it on right now, Mama," and tucked the receipt somewhere in her cluttered apartment across town. She'd promised to find it, to email it, to handle it herself. But Dorothy knew her daughter. Simone worked 70-hour weeks at the hospital, following in her mother's footsteps, though she'd made it to surgeon where Dorothy had remained a floor nurse. She didn't have time to deal with something like this. So Dorothy had come herself, dressed carefully folded in her library bag, hoping the store's computer system would show the purchase, that a manager would be understanding, that basic human decency would prevail. Welcome to Le Menu. The young clerk had been cheerful at first, her smile bright and rehearsed. She couldn't have been more than 22, with box braids and carefully applied makeup. How can I help you today? I need to return this dress. Dorothy had placed it on the counter gently, as if it were something precious rather than something wrong. My daughter bought it for me last week, but it's not quite right. She has the receipt at home. She's a surgeon, very busy, but I thought perhaps you could look up the purchase in your system. The clerk's smile had flickered. Her eyes had moved from the dress to Dorothy, then to the canvas bag, then back to the dress. Some calculation was happening behind those eyes, some assessment being made. Let me get my manager. That was the first warning sign. The hesitation, the way the clerk had stepped back from the counter as if Dorothy had placed something contaminated there instead of a $300 dress that still smelled like department store perfume. The manager had appeared from the back room with the confidence of someone who'd never been questioned. Madison, her name tag read. She was perhaps 40, blonde, her own clothing clearly expensive, her manner projecting the kind of authority that came from always being believed. What seems to be the problem? Madison had asked, but she wasn't really asking. She was announcing that a problem existed, and Dorothy was it. No problem at all. Dorothy had replied with the practiced patience of someone who'd been navigating these waters her entire life. I just need to return this dress. My daughter purchased it last week. Do you have a receipt? Not with me, but if you could check your records. Store policy requires a receipt for all returns. Madison had crossed her arms. No exceptions. I understand, but surely your computer system, without a receipt, there's no way to verify this purchase was even made at our store. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Dorothy had felt her spine straighten, that old defensive posture she'd hoped she'd never need to use again. My daughter, Dr. Simone Williams, purchased this dress from this store last Wednesday. She paid with her credit card. If you check your sales records, we can't just check records for every person who walks in with merchandise and no receipt. Madison's tone had sharpened. How do we know you didn't buy this at a discount retailer? Or, she'd paused, let the silence do its ugly work. Acquire it some other way. The accusation wasn't spoken, but it didn't need to be. Dorothy had heard it loud and clear. So had the other customers who'd begun to pay attention now that voices were rising. I'm not a thief. Dorothy's voice had remained steady, but her hands had begun to shake. I'm a 73-year-old retired nurse trying to return a dress my daughter bought me. That is all. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Not without my refund or my daughter's dress. Security is on their way. And that's when the young clerk, Kenya, Dorothy would later learn her name was, had whispered, Ms. Madison, maybe we should just check the system. It would only take a second. Stay out of this, Kenya. Ma'am, you need to leave. Now, the security guard had been apologetic at least. Quiet. He'd seen the whole thing, and his eyes had told Dorothy he didn't like it. But he had a job to keep and bills to pay, and this wasn't the hill he was going to die on. He'd escorted Dorothy to the door with a light touch on her elbow, respectful but firm. And Madison had stood there, arms still crossed, watching Dorothy's exit with the satisfied expression of someone who'd won an argument, never considering that she'd done something monstrous. Now outside, Dorothy's phone was buzzing insistently. She pulled it out, expecting Simone, maybe asking if she'd handled the return. Instead, the screen showed 15 missed calls, 27 text messages, 3 voicemails, all from numbers she didn't recognize. Her hand was still shaking as she opened the first message. Mrs. Williams, this is Janet Shin from the mayor's office. We've been trying to reach you. It's urgent. Please call immediately. The second message, Dorothy, it's Marcus Reed from the hospital. We need to speak with you as soon as possible. It's about the awards ceremony. The third, Ms. Williams, this is Channel 7 News. We understand you're being honored this afternoon and would love to get a statement. Dorothy's mind went blank. Award ceremony? She looked at the date on her phone. November 16th. Oh God, she'd forgotten. The ballroom of the Grandview Hotel was 6 blocks away. Dorothy stood frozen on the boutique steps, her phone still buzzing in her hand, reality reshaping itself around her like a kaleidoscope finding its pattern. The ceremony, the award. The email she'd received 3 weeks ago from the mayor's office, the one she'd read and reread and ultimately tucked away in her mind as something that couldn't possibly be real, that couldn't possibly be about her. The Mayor's Medal of Honor, in recognition of 4 decades of extraordinary service to the community. She'd thought it was a mistake, or a formality, a nice certificate, maybe a handshake, something quiet. She'd almost not gone. What did an old retired nurse need with awards? She'd just done her job, just shown up day after day for 42 years. But Simone had insisted. Mama, this is a big deal. The mayor doesn't give out these medals to just anyone. You're being honored at a ceremony. Real deal. You have to be there. 2 o'clock, don't forget. And Dorothy, embarrassed by the fuss, had agreed to go. Then, in the chaos of the morning, in the desire to solve the simple problem of a dress that didn't fit, she'd gotten distracted. Lost track of time. She checked her watch. 2:17 p.m. She was late to her own awards ceremony. Mrs. Williams. A young man was running toward her from a black sedan that had just pulled up. He was breathless, wearing a suit, holding an earpiece to his head. Mrs. Williams, thank God. We've been looking everywhere for you. The mayor is waiting. The whole ceremony is on hold. Please, we need to get you to the Grand View immediately. I forgot, Dorothy said, and it sounded absurd even to her own ears. I was just trying to return a dress. The young man, chief of staff to the mayor, he explained hurriedly as he guided her to the car. Didn't seem to hear the dress part. He was talking rapidly into his phone. Found her. She's fine. We'll be there in 5 minutes. Keep the media ready. Media. Dorothy's stomach lurched. Through the car window, as they pulled away from the curb, she caught one last glimpse of Luminu Boutique. The manager, Madison, was visible through the glass, helping a customer, completely unaware that the woman she'd just humiliated and ejected from her store was, at this very moment, being rushed to a ceremony in her honor. The ballroom was chaos controlled by ruthless efficiency. The moment Dorothy stepped through the doors, she was surrounded. Simone appeared first, her surgeon's calm cracking into relief and fury. Mama, where were you? I've been calling. We all thought. I'm sorry, baby. I lost track of time. You lost. Simone stopped herself, seeing something in her mother's face. What happened? But there was no time. The mayor herself was approaching, a woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and a smile that managed to be both political and genuinely warm. Mrs. Williams, we're so glad you're here. We were worried. I apologize for the delay, Mayor Chun. No apologies necessary. You ready? We have about 300 people waiting to hear your story. 300 people. Dorothy's head swam. The mayor guided her toward the stage, where a podium stood beneath a massive screen showing photographs. Dorothy as a young nurse in 1982, holding a newborn. Dorothy comforting a patient in the ICU. Dorothy teaches a CPR class at a community center. Dorothy, a life of service displayed in pixels and light for everyone to see. We'll do the presentation first, the mayor was saying. Then I'd love for you to say a few words. Nothing formal, just who you are. Why do you do what you do? The ceremony began. The mayor spoke of dedication, of quiet heroism, of the nurses and community members who form the backbone of society without ever seeking recognition. She listed Dorothy's accomplishments, 42 years of service. Thousands of patients were cared for. Volunteer work at homeless shelters. Free health clinics run from church basements. Letters of gratitude from families whose loved ones had died in Dorothy's arms, who'd said her presence had made the unbearable bearable. Dorothy Williams, the mayor concluded, her voice ringing through the ballroom, represents the very best of us. Not because she's extraordinary, though she is, but because she showed up, day after day, year after year, in the face of inadequate funding, impossible hours, and a healthcare system that often failed to value her contributions. She showed up. For all of us. The applause was thunderous. Dorothy climbed the stage steps carefully, her worn sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished wood. The mayor hung the medal around her neck, a heavy bronze disc engraved with the city seal and her name. The cameras flashed. 300 people were standing now, clapping, and Dorothy felt tears threatening. She approached the microphone. "I don't know what to say," she began, and her voice cracked. "I'm not used to being seen." The room went quiet. "I spent my whole life being invisible," Dorothy continued, the words coming now from somewhere deep and honest. "As a black woman, as a nurse, as someone who worked the night shifts and the thankless positions. I cleaned up after the doctors got the credit. I held hands nobody else would hold. I showed up to rooms people were afraid to enter. And most days that felt like enough. Just doing the work. Just being useful." She paused, looked out at the crowd. News cameras, city officials, hospital administrators, community members. Her daughter, crying silently in the front row. "But today," Dorothy said, "before I came here, something happened that reminded me why this work matters. Why being seen matters. Why treating every human being with dignity isn't just nice, it's necessary." She told them. Everything. The dress, the receipt, the accusation that was never quite spoken but absolutely understood. The assumption that she was a thief based on nothing but her appearance, her age, her skin. The casual cruelty of being ejected from a store for the crime of expecting to be treated like a customer. "The woman who threw me out," Dorothy said, "she looked at me and didn't see a person. She saw a problem, a risk, something to be removed. And I realized," her voice broke, "I realized that's what happens when we stop seeing each other. When we decide someone isn't worth our time, our courtesy, our basic human respect." The ballroom was absolutely silent now. "I've spent 42 years seeing people," Dorothy continued, "really seeing them. Not their insurance status or their bank account or the color of their skin. Just their humanity, their fear, their pain, their hope. And it mattered. It mattered to them, and it mattered to me because being seen, truly seen, is what makes us human." She touched the medal on her chest. "So, thank you for seeing me today, for this honor. But more importantly, thank you for reminding me that the work I did wasn't invisible after all, that it mattered, that I mattered." The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. At 3:47 p.m., Kenya, the young clerk from Luminu Boutique, was scrolling through her Instagram feed during her break when she saw the news story. The video was everywhere. Local news, social media, trending on Twitter. Elderly nurse honored with mayor's medal. Same woman wrongly accused of theft hours earlier. Kenya's blood went cold. The video showed Dorothy Williams on stage, wearing her worn jacket and faded jeans, a bronze medal around her neck, telling the story of what had happened. The news anchor's voiceover was damning. The beloved community nurse was humiliated and ejected from a boutique just hours before receiving the city's highest civilian honor. The store in question, Luminu at Westfield Plaza, has not yet responded to requests for comment. Kenya looked up from her phone. Madison was at the counter, ringing up a sale, completely unaware. The store phone began to ring. Then it rang again, and again. Within an hour, the corporate office had called. The district manager was on his way. A news van was pulling into the parking lot, and Madison, watching the same video Kenya had watched, went pale as a ghost. "Oh my God," Madison whispered. "Oh my God, that was her." Kenya wanted to say, "Yes, that was her. That was her. And I told you we should check the system. I told you, and you didn't listen, because you'd already decided who she was based on nothing but your own prejudice." But Kenya didn't say that. She just watched as everything unraveled. The following morning, Dorothy Williams sat in her small apartment, watching the sunrise paint her kitchen walls gold. Her phone had been ringing constantly. Interview requests, apologies from Luminua's CEO, personal, stammering, promising policy changes and sensitivity training, and a full refund plus damages. Simone had wanted her to sue. "They humiliated you, Mama. Make them pay." But Dorothy had declined. The CEO's apology had been genuine, she thought. Madison, the manager, had been fired, swift and public, a corporate sacrifice on the altar of public relations. Kenya, the young clerk, had been promoted to interim manager with a promise to implement new training protocols. Justice isn't always about punishment, Dorothy had told Simone. Sometimes it's about learning, about changing, about becoming better. The dress had been returned, of course, with apologies, with gift cards Dorothy would never use. with assurances that this type of incident would never happen again. But Dorothy knew better. It would happen again. Maybe not at Lumanu. Maybe not to her. But somewhere to someone, it would happen again because the route went deeper than one store, one manager, one bad day. Still, something had shifted. The story resonated. Not just locally, but nationally. People were sharing it, talking about it, using it as an example in diversity training in college classes and dinner table conversations. The invisible made visible. The dismissed honored. The assumptions challenged. Dorothy's favorite response had come from a young black woman on social media who'd written, "My grandmother had this same thing happen to her in the 60s, the 80s, the 2000s, and last year. The only difference is now we have cell phones to record it and social media to share it." But seeing Mrs. Williams get her flowers while she can still smell them, that healed something in me I didn't know was broken. That's what mattered, Dorothy thought. Not revenge, not punishment, but the healing that came from being seen, being heard, being believed. She thought about Madison sometimes, wondered if the woman had learned anything, or if she'd simply become more careful about who she judged out loud. She thought about all the Madisons in the world, carrying their assumptions like weapons, dealing damage without even realizing it. And she thought about all the Dorothys, the invisible ones, the ones doing the work, holding the world together with their quiet dignity and persistent showing up, never asking for medals or recognition, just trying to exist with respect. The medal sat on her kitchen table now, heavy and bronze and surreal. Simone wanted her to display it. Dorothy wasn't sure. It felt strange, being honored for simply being human, for doing what seemed obvious, seeing others, respecting others, showing up. But maybe that was the point. Maybe in a world that had forgotten how to see people, really see them, simply showing up with dignity and compassion was revolutionary. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this one from the hospital where she'd worked for 42 years. They wanted to name a conference room after her. The Dorothy Williams Center for Patient Dignity. She smiled, set the phone down, and poured her coffee. Outside her window, the city was waking up. People were beginning their days, rushing to work, absorbed in their own dramas and deadlines. Most of them are invisible to each other, just like she'd been invisible for so long. But maybe, just maybe, a few of them would remember her story. I would remember to look twice, to see the person behind the appearance, to question their assumptions before they harden into actions. That would be enough, more than enough. The sunrise turned her kitchen walls from gold to white as morning fully arrived. Dorothy Williams, medal recipient and retired nurse, former invisible woman, now briefly spotlighted, finished her coffee and began her day. Just showing up, just being human. It had always been enough.